Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I worked at a place where having a criminal record was not unusual at all. It wasn't encouraged, and it definitely wasn't praised, but it also wasn't something people were immediately judged for. That kind of job attracted people from all kinds of backgrounds. Some were trying to rebuild their lives. Some were just passing through. Others carried parts of their past with them quietly, without explanation. You learned very quickly not to ask questions you didn't want the answers to. You learned to focus on whether someone showed up, did their work, and didn't cause trouble. That was enough. In an environment like that, assumptions were useless, and judgment was something you kept to yourself. One of my coworkers was a guy like that. I knew he had a criminal record. That much was common knowledge. But I didn't know what it was for, and honestly, I didn't care to know. He never talked about it. He didn't brag. He didn't complain. He just worked. He showed up on time, kept his head down, and didn't draw attention to himself. He was quiet, but not rude. Polite enough? Never crossed boundaries. Never made me uncomfortable. If anything, he blended in so well that most nights he barely registered as anything more than another person clocking in and out. He also lived near me, just a few blocks away. Because of that, I'd sometimes give him a ride home after work. It wasn't planned or formal. It just happened naturally. We worked late hours, usually overnight, and sometimes our shifts ended right around bar closing time, anywhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. At that hour, the city feels different. Streets are quieter, but not empty. Certain types of people are more visible. Dealers, lookouts, people lingering outside buildings with no obvious reason to be there. You get used to it after a while. You learn which blocks to walk fast through and which corners not to stop at. The neighborhood wasn't great, but it wasn't unfamiliar to me either. I had lived there long enough to know the rhythm of the place. Who stayed outside late, who watched quietly, who didn't want trouble and who might. They never bothered me. As a white woman in that area at that time of night, I was mostly ignored. Neutral looks, no comments, no catcalls, no aggression. I didn't feel safe exactly, but I felt tolerated. Left alone, invisible enough to pass through without incident. One night, after another long shift, I dropped my coworker off like usual. I pulled up near his building. I slowed the car, and he got out. Before he walked away, he said something to the guys standing outside my building. I didn't hear every word clearly, but I caught enough of it. Something like, "She's cool." It was casual, almost throwaway, like it didn't matter. But it did. I saw the change immediately. The men who had always looked at me with mild indifference suddenly smiled, nodded. One of them even said hello in a friendly tone. The energy shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. The tension that usually sat quietly in the air around them softened, like I had just been approved, like I had been vouched for. That moment stayed with me. Not in a scary way at first, more in a curious way. It was the first time I really understood how much weight someone else's reputation could carry in a place like that. How being associated with the right person could change how others treated you instantly, without a single question asked. Later that night, during my break, I was sitting alone scrolling through Facebook. Just mindless scrolling, killing time. Then I saw a post. Someone had been shot and killed. It had happened just a few blocks from where I lived. The timing was recent. The location was close, too close. I felt something drop in my stomach. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear. It was a quiet, heavy sensation, like my body had noticed something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Without really thinking about it, my first thought was him. I didn't know why. The next thing I noticed was that he hadn't come into work that night. Now, logically, that meant nothing. People called out all the time. People quit without notice. People disappeared for weeks and then showed back up like nothing had happened. That job was full of instability. Attendance was optional for some people. Reliability wasn't a given. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I didn't accuse him in my head. I didn't imagine scenes or invent motives. It was just a quiet, persistent sense that something wasn't right. The timing, the location, the way he had spoken to those guys like he belonged there. A month later, the news broke. They had arrested him. He was the one who committed the murder. When I heard, I didn't react the way people expect you to. There was no gasp, no shock, no disbelief. Instead, it felt like confirmation. Like my body had already accepted the possibility before my brain allowed it. What unsettled me the most was what I learned next. That he had come into work one last time after the killing. I had been there. He acted completely normal. No shaking, no visible anxiety, no signs of guilt or stress that I could see. He worked his shift like any other night. Clocked in. Did his tasks. Talked when spoken to. Followed routine. At the end of the shift, he told management he'd gotten a new job and put in his notice. That wasn't unusual at all. People came and went constantly at that place. The general manager didn't question it, didn't push back, didn't ask where he was going or why. That was normal, too. You didn't chase people who wanted to leave. After that shift, he called the GM and officially quit. Then he disappeared. Looking back, what disturbs me most isn't just that I knew someone who committed murder. It's how ordinary everything around it felt. How easily he blended into daily life. How casually he moved through spaces where violence was already part of the background noise. How someone capable of something so extreme could still function so normally, so quietly, so invisibly. That moment outside my building, when he told those men I was cool, plays in my head sometimes. The way their attitude changed instantly. The way he held authority in that space without ever announcing it. I think about how close that violence was. Physically close. Socially close. How I had been giving rides home to someone capable of killing another person without ever realizing it. Sitting in a car with him, talking casually, sharing space. Nothing bad happened to me. I wasn't threatened, I wasn't harmed. But the proximity alone is enough to unsettle me even now. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look chaotic or unstable. Sometimes it clocks in, works a shift, says goodnight, and walks out like any other person. And sometimes your gut notices before your mind does. That quiet feeling you can't explain. The sense that something doesn't fit. The instinct that tells you to pay attention even when logic says there's no reason to. I didn't act on it. I didn't accuse him. I didn't warn anyone. But I felt it. And I don't ignore those feelings anymore. To this day, I still think about Miss Pamela. I didn't know her the way adults know each other. I knew her the way a kid knows a neighbor. Through impressions, through feelings, through the way someone makes you feel safe or seen without really trying. I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan. It wasn't an easy place to grow up, but when you're a kid, you don't always see the danger clearly. You notice people more than systems, faces more than patterns. Miss Pamela was one of those faces. She lived nearby. And from my perspective as a kid, she was just cool. That's the best word I had for her then, and honestly, it still fits now. She didn't talk down to me. She didn't treat me like I was invisible or annoying. She spoke to me like a person, not like a problem. That alone made her stand out. Her mom was awesome, too. She had that energy adults sometimes have where they don't try to impress you, but you can tell they don't see kids as lesser. She drove a really nice car, at least by my standards. I remember noticing it, the way kids notice shiny things, but also the pride around it. It felt like something she'd earned. Miss Pamela had her life, her routines, her struggles, most of which I didn't understand at the time. I didn't know about the drinking back then. I didn't know about the labels adults quietly use to sort people into categories that make them easier to ignore. To me, she was just a neighbor who felt real. Then, one day, she was gone. I didn't fully grasp what that meant at first. Adults spoke in lowered voices. Conversations stopped when kids entered rooms. There was a strange tension in the air that I couldn't name. I just knew something was wrong. What I didn't know then, but learned later, was how badly she had been failed from the very beginning. Miss Pamela drank. That fact became the excuse, the explanation, the reason people didn't look too closely when she didn't come home, when she didn't answer calls, when her absence stretched longer than it should have. Her daughter knew something was wrong. She told the police. She insisted. She didn't accept the easy explanation. She said her mother wouldn't just disappear like that. She pushed back against the idea that this was just another drunk going off on a bender. They didn't listen. They brushed it off. Another checkbox. Another name quietly filed away as unimportant. What actually happened was far worse than anything those officers likely imagined, and far more preventable if they had taken her disappearance seriously from the start. Someone wanted Miss Pamela's car. That's it. That was the motive. Not rage, not passion, not personal history, just a car. He stole it. And instead of leaving her somewhere, instead of pushing her out and driving off, he put her in the trunk. Alive. He drove around with her like that for days. That part is still almost impossible to comprehend. The cruelty of it, the casualness. The idea that a human being could be reduced to cargo, hidden and ignored while life went on above her. His girlfriend knew she was in the trunk. I've heard that more than one person likely knew. People saw, people suspected. People chose not to ask too many questions. Miss Pamela was trapped in the dark, in the cold, in a space designed to hold nothing alive, while people who could have done something chose not to. I don't remember exactly how she was found. Some details fade with time, or maybe my mind protects itself from holding on to every part of it. What I do remember is how it ended. She drank antifreeze. Whether it was out of desperation, confusion, pain, or the slow breakdown of her body and mind under unbearable conditions, I don't know. What I do know is that antifreeze is not something a person drinks unless everything else has already gone terribly wrong. She died that way. Not quickly. Not gently. Miss Pamela had her issues. I understand that now. Addiction complicates everything. It makes people harder to defend in the eyes of systems that already struggle to see humanity clearly. But to that kid in Pontiac, she was just Miss Pamela. She was kind, she was present. She was someone who didn't make me feel small. She absolutely adored her grandbabies. That part sticks with me deeply. The way she talked about them. The way her face lit up when they were mentioned. The way love still anchored her to the world, even when other parts of her life were unstable. I hope they knew that. I hope they felt it. I hope that when they think of her, they remember the warmth before the tragedy, not just the way her story ended. I'm around her age now. That realization hits me sometimes out of nowhere. I'll be going about my day, and suddenly I'll remember her, and it'll hit me that I've reached the point in life she never got to live beyond, that her future was stolen long before her body gave out. I think about how unfair it all was, how quickly she was dismissed, how her drinking became the reason no one looked harder, how her daughter's voice wasn't enough to trigger urgency, how systems designed to protect people quietly decided she wasn't worth the effort. She wasn't invisible. She was ignored. There's a difference. And that difference cost her everything. When I think about Miss Pamela now, I don't think about the crime first. I think about the neighbor who didn't talk down to me, the woman who felt cool and human and real, the person who loved her grandkids fiercely, even while carrying her own struggles. I think about how many people like her disappear quietly because their pain makes them inconvenient. I think about how many stories are written off before they're even fully heard. And I think about how much the world failed her, long before she was ever locked in that trunk. She deserved better. She deserved to be believed. She deserved urgency. She deserved help. She deserved to come home. I still think about her, and I always will. I'll try to put this into words the best I can, even though it's one of those experiences that still sits heavy in my chest no matter how much time has passed. What makes it different from a lot of stories is that this wasn't something only I experienced. Both my brothers, my mother, and my stepdad were there. We all lived through it. We all heard it. And to this day, every one of us will tell you the same thing happened. When I was very young, somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, we lived in a large, very old 2-story house. It wasn't just my immediate family either. Because the house was so big, some of my stepdad's friends lived there as roommates. There were always adults coming and going, different voices, different routines, but despite all of that, the house never felt alive in a comforting way. It felt heavy, like quiet in the wrong moments, like it was holding its breath. My bedroom was upstairs, at the top of the staircase, on the left side. The thing that always bothered me, even back then, was that my room didn't have a door. It was just open to the stairwell. My brothers shared the room directly across from me, so we were close. But that open doorway still made me feel exposed, especially at night. The staircase itself had doors at both the top and the bottom. Every single night before bed, I would close both of them. Not because anyone told me to, but because it made me feel safer. I was already an anxious kid. I didn't know why I felt uneasy in that house, but my body knew something was wrong long before my mind could explain it. What no one told me at the time was that the previous owner of the house, our great-uncle Earl, had committed suicide there. Not just in the house, in my bedroom. Years later, when I was finally told the truth, my stomach dropped in a way I still remember clearly. Uncle Earl had hung himself in that room, directly above the spot where my bed sat. Every night, while I slept there as a child, I was sleeping beneath the place where he had died. But even before I knew that, things were happening. Starting around 10 or 11 o'clock every night, we would hear footsteps, not creaks, not settling wood, not the random noises old houses make. These were clear, heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. They came from the bottom of the stairs. What made it worse was that the door at the bottom of the stairwell never opened. We would hear the steps start anyway. They would move slowly, one by one, climbing the stairs. Each step was distinct, or you could tell exactly where they were, exactly how far they'd gone. The sound traveled upward, step after step, until it reached the top. Then the footsteps would walk into my room, and after that, they would stop. For a moment. Then they would start again at the bottom. This cycle would repeat over and over every single night, until around 4 in the morning. Years, not days, not weeks. Years of my childhood. I cannot properly describe the fear. It wasn't a quick scare that fades. It was slow, constant, and suffocating. Even now, typing this out, I can feel that same cold, hollow sensation in my chest. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your throat tighten. The kind that feels like your body is bracing for something it can't escape. My brothers heard it too. Both of them. My mom heard it. My stepdad heard it. This wasn't imagination or a kid being dramatic. We all knew when it started. We all knew when it stopped. We all dreaded nighttime. My youngest brother would sometimes say he saw people in the house at night. That part still messes with me. At the time, adults brushed it off as a kid's imagination. But looking back, we think he may have been more sensitive to whatever was there. He would describe things casually, like it was normal, which somehow made it worse. Kids don't usually lie with that kind of calm certainty. One night, curiosity and terror mixed into something reckless. I decided I needed to see who was coming up those stairs. I waited until the footsteps started, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I crept to the top of the stairwell, opened the door, and turned on the light. The moment the light came on, or the footsteps stopped. Instantly, there was nothing there. No shadow, no shape, no movement, just empty stairs and silence. I didn't wait to process it. I bolted back into my room, dove under my blankets, and tried to disappear. Moments later, the footsteps started again at the bottom. That was the moment I realized something important. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be seen. As time went on, my mom started responding to it in her own way. On nights when the footsteps were louder or more aggressive, she would yell from her room, "Go to bed, Earl!" And this is the part that still blows my mind. The footsteps would stop. Not always immediately, but they would stop. It was as if whatever was replaying those nights recognized her voice, recognized the name, recognized that it was being acknowledged. We all grew up with a shared fear and fascination of ghosts and the afterlife because of that house. You don't live through something like that and come out neutral. It shapes how you see the world, how you think about death, about what lingers. Eventually, we moved out. Years later, the house was burned down in a controlled burn to make way for new suburban development. When I heard about it, I went to the site. All that was left was rubble and ash. I picked up a couple of scorched bricks and kept them, not because I missed the house, but because it was real. It happened. And I needed something tangible to remind myself that those nights weren't imagined. I will always believe in ghosts now. Not because I want to, but because I lived with one. And I don't think Uncle Earl ever really knew how to stop walking up those stairs. When I think back on it now, I still find it strange that the whole experience never really scared me the way it probably should have. Maybe that's just how my brain works. I'm neurodivergent, and I've always processed fear and unfamiliar situations a little differently. Things that unsettle other people don't always hit me the same way, and things that should feel impossible sometimes just register as odd instead of terrifying. Years ago, when I was in my 20s, I owned a third of a photo studio near my hometown. It wasn't some massive business or anything glamorous, but for a guy that age, it felt like a big deal. I had my own office space. I had keys. I could walk into a downtown building and say, "Yeah, this is mine." That alone felt like an accomplishment. But the studio was located inside a small suite tucked into a downtown city block. All the buildings in that block were interconnected, forming a sort of square with a courtyard in the middle. It was one of those old setups you don't see much anymore. At one point, the area must have been busy, but by the time we were there, most of the surrounding spaces were either warehouses or completely vacant. During the day, it was quiet. At night, it was dead. Inside our studio, there was a small lobby area where we had an old couch. It wasn't fancy, but it was surprisingly comfortable. On nights when I didn't feel like going home, or when I was working late and didn't want to bother with the commute, I'd crash on that couch. Maybe once a week, sometimes more. I didn't think twice about it. I liked having the place to myself, and there was something peaceful about it. Almost every night I stayed there, I heard voices. Not clear voices, not whispers, nothing that formed words. It was more like the sound of conversation carried over a long distance. If you've ever been outside on a warm day, completely alone, and you hear people talking somewhere far away, so far that the words don't reach you, only the rhythm and rise and fall of speech. That's what it sounded like. The voices were constant. They didn't rise or fall dramatically. They didn't seem angry or excited. Just steady, low communication, like a group of people calmly talking among themselves somewhere beyond the walls. I couldn't tell if they were male or female. I couldn't tell how many there were. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. At first, I assumed there had to be a logical explanation. The building was old. Sound travels weirdly in old buildings. Maybe there were people in another connected suite. Maybe there were homeless people squatting somewhere in the block. That seemed far more likely to me than anything supernatural. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel threatened. I just noticed it, the same way you notice traffic noise in the distance. Eventually, I mentioned it casually to one of my business partners. She laughed and said, "Oh, that's just ghosty." She said it like it was a nickname for a quirky office pet. Then she casually added that she'd forgotten to tell me the place was haunted. I laughed it off. Not in a dismissive way, just in a "that's funny" way. I still leaned toward the idea of homeless people, or sound echoing through empty buildings. I wasn't opposed to the idea of ghosts in theory, but I wasn't about to jump to that conclusion without something more concrete. Then one Sunday afternoon, something happened that made me stop shrugging it off. I was sitting at my computer, working alone. Sundays were always quiet, but that day was especially still. The kind of quiet where you become very aware of your own movements. I suddenly heard footsteps. They were coming from our unused atrium walkway, a narrow passage that connected our office space to the courtyard. That walkway wasn't something anyone ever used. There was no reason for someone to be there. But the sound was unmistakable. The footsteps echoed in a very specific way. If you've ever heard someone walking on hardwood floors above a basement or a crawl space, you know that hollow, resonant sound. That's exactly what it sounded like. Or the footsteps moved steadily along the walkway until they reached the door right next to where I was sitting. Then they stopped. My first thought was the landlord. I had been told he might stop by at some point, though no specific time was given. So I waited. And waited. Nothing happened. After a while, I got up to check. I opened the door and immediately noticed something was off. The light in the atrium room was off. That room was unfinished. The floor wasn't hardwood at all. It was bare concrete. There was no ceiling treatment. Nothing that would echo footsteps the way I'd just heard. On top of that, there was a massive area rug in the room. We had rolled it up and tossed it in there months earlier. It was laid diagonally across the space, taking up most of the floor. Even if someone knew it was there, in the dark, you wouldn't casually walk across that room without tripping or having to step over it carefully. That made no sense. Still trying to be rational, I decided to double-check everything. I walked the entire city block. I went out into the courtyard. I peered through the windows of other businesses. That's how I know it was a Sunday. There was no one. No lights, no movement, no cars, no sounds. I was completely alone. Eventually, I went back inside and sat down at my desk again. A few minutes later, the footsteps started again. This time, they came from the back of the atrium room, moving toward the back office door. I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I felt more curious than anything else. I stood up quietly, walked toward the door, put my hand on the knob, and waited until the footsteps were right there. Then I swung the door open, flipped on the light, and said, "Hello?" in one smooth motion. The footsteps stopped instantly. There was nothing there. No movement, no sound, no temperature change, no weird sensations. Just an empty room with concrete floors and a rolled-up rug lying exactly where it had been. And that was it. Nothing else happened. The footsteps didn't return. The voices didn't suddenly grow louder. There were no cold spots, no shadows, no visuals of any kind. It was almost disappointingly uneventful after all that build-up. I stayed there plenty of nights after that, but nothing like that ever happened again. I like to joke that I wasn't a very satisfying person to haunt, that whatever was there tried, realized I wasn't reacting the way it wanted, and decided to move on. Maybe Ghosty got bored. To this day, I don't know what it was. I'm not convinced it was a ghost, but I'm also not convinced it wasn't. What sticks with me isn't fear, but the certainty of the sound. The footsteps were real, the timing was real, and the physical setup of that room made it impossible for someone to walk the way I heard them walk. Sometimes, the strangest experiences aren't the ones that leave you screaming or running. Sometimes they just sit quietly in your memory, unresolved, waiting for you to decide what they meant. And sometimes, you never do. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. A very good friend of mine is a gay man who has always been naturally attractive, outgoing, and easy to talk to. Back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, he worked as a bartender at a popular dance club in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At the time, it was known primarily as a gay club, but it also attracted a mixed crowd because of the music, the atmosphere, and the cheap drinks. It was one of those places where everyone felt welcome, as long as they weren't causing trouble. We spent a lot of time there. Drink special nights were the best. The music was loud, the dance floor was always full, and because my friend worked the bar, the drinks were strong and inexpensive. It was the kind of place where you could lose track of time without even trying. You'd go in planning to stay for an hour, and suddenly it was last call. My friend was good at his job, but more than that, he was good with people. He remembered faces, names, favorite drinks. Customers liked him, trusted him, flirted with him. Being a bartender in that scene meant meeting a lot of new people every night. Some stayed strangers, some became regulars, and some turned into brief crushes or one-night connections. It was just part of the culture back then, especially before people fully understood how dangerous some things could be. One night in the summer of 1991, a few of us were hanging out at our flat. Nothing special, just cards, cheap beer, and the TV on in the background for noise. We weren't really watching it. The news was on, but it was just background sound while we talked and played. Then the broadcast shifted. The tone of the anchor changed. The screen cut to flashing lights, police tape, and a mugshot. And the name appeared under the photo, Jeffrey Dahmer. At first, none of us paid attention. Milwaukee had crime like any other city. But then my friend froze. He didn't just pause. He went completely still. Cards in his hand, mouth slightly open. His eyes locked onto the television like he was staring at something that didn't make sense. We noticed right away. "What's wrong?" someone asked. He didn't answer at first. He leaned forward slowly, squinting at the screen as if getting closer would somehow change what he was seeing. The room got quiet without anyone meaning for it to. Even the card game stopped. Then he said, very calmly, almost too calmly, "You guys remember that cute blonde I told you about?" We all did. Just a month earlier, he had come home from work talking about a guy who had been sitting at the bar. Blonde. Quiet. A little awkward, but polite. Not flashy, not loud. The kind of guy who didn't stand out in a club full of energy, but somehow stood out to him. He had mentioned that the guy seemed shy, maybe nervous, but sweet. He had been trying to work up the nerve to flirt more openly. That night, a few of us had shown up at the bar to hang out. We were loud, laughing, doing what friends do when they're a little drunk and having fun. My friend later said that the blonde guy seemed uncomfortable when we arrived. He finished his drink quickly, said a polite goodbye, and left earlier than expected. At the time, it was nothing. Just another missed connection. Another face in a long list of faces you meet working behind a bar. Now my friend was staring at that same face on the news. "That's him," he said quietly. "That's the guy." The air in the room changed instantly. At first, none of us wanted to believe it. We laughed nervously, not because it was funny, but because it was too unreal to process. Someone said, "No way, he probably just looks like him." But my friend shook his head. He was sure. He described details he hadn't mentioned before. The way he stood, the way he spoke, the sound of his voice, the specific drink he ordered. Little things that don't matter until suddenly they do. He sat back on the couch, pale, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. The news continued in the background, getting worse by the minute. The apartment, the evidence, the victims. The details were horrifying, and they kept coming. We learned that this wasn't just a crime. It wasn't even just one murder. It was something much darker, something that had been happening quietly, hidden in plain sight. My friend didn't say much after that. Later, when the shock wore off enough for him to talk, he admitted something that stuck with me. He said the guy had made him feel uneasy, but he couldn't explain why at the time. Nothing obvious. No red flags you could point to. Just a subtle feeling that something was off. Not dangerous. Just wrong. Enough that he hadn't pushed harder to flirt. Enough that he hadn't followed him home. Enough that he was annoyed when we showed up, but also a little relieved. At the time, he had brushed that feeling aside. Working in a bar, you learn to ignore little instincts like that. If you trusted every vague sense of discomfort, you'd never talk to anyone. Especially back then, when the community was smaller, more trusting, and far less aware of how vulnerable it could be. As the days passed and more details came out, the weight of it really hit him. He kept replaying that night in his head. The conversation, the way the guy smiled, the way he paid his tab, the way he walked out the door. He wondered how close he had been to becoming more than just someone behind the bar. He wondered how many small decisions, made without thinking, had unknowingly kept him safe. It messed with him for a long time. Not just fear, but guilt. Survivor's guilt. The kind that makes no sense logically, but still hurts. He kept thinking about the people who didn't get that moment of hesitation, that interruption, that lucky break. People who didn't have friends show up at the wrong time. People who didn't listen to a quiet instinct they couldn't name. For all of us, it changed how we saw the city. Milwaukee felt smaller after that, less safe. The idea that someone so unassuming, someone who blended in so easily, had been walking into the same bars, ordering drinks, chatting casually, made everything feel fragile. It shattered the belief that danger looks dangerous. My friend eventually left bartending. Not right away, but within a year or two. He said he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't really know anyone anymore. That smiling faces could hide anything. That friendliness didn't mean safety. Even now, decades later, he still remembers that moment when the photo appeared on the screen. The way time seemed to slow. The way his stomach dropped. The way recognition hit before logic could catch up. And every time the story of Jeffrey Dahmer comes up, it's not the headlines or the documentaries that get to him. It's the memory of a quiet guy at the bar, a missed flirtation, and how close ordinary life can brush up against unimaginable horror without you ever realizing it at the time. I was living in an apartment in Oslo that, from the very beginning, felt wrong in a way I couldn't easily explain. It wasn't dramatic or obvious at first. There were no loud noises, no clear signs of anything being off. It was more like a feeling that settled into your bones slowly. The kind of feeling you try to ignore because you don't want to sound irrational. I've always considered myself a skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. I like logic. I like explanations. But that apartment tested me in ways I still don't fully understand. The building itself was old. Very old. It had been built sometime in the mid-1800s, back when Oslo was a very different city. You could feel that age the moment you walked in. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The floors creaked constantly, not just when you walked on them, but randomly, as if the building shifted on its own schedule. The walls were thick, uneven in places, and held on to the cold in a way modern buildings don't. There were 3 of us living there, 2 girls and me. On paper, it was a great setup. The rent was reasonable, the location was good, and the apartment itself was spacious for a place that old. At first, we joked about the building's age. We laughed about the crooked floors and the doors that didn't quite close right. None of us thought much about it. But very quickly, certain rooms began to feel different. There was one room in particular that I absolutely hated. I didn't have a logical reason for it. Nothing visibly wrong with it. No broken windows, no damp walls. But the moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, not subtly. It felt colder than the rest of the apartment, no matter how high we turned the heat up. You could walk from a perfectly warm hallway into that room and feel the chill wrap around you immediately. Even worse than the cold were the thoughts. Every single time I was in that room, the same thoughts would push their way into my mind. Images of children crying, children being scared, children in danger. It wasn't like I was imagining a specific scene or story. It was more like a sudden emotional impression, heavy and disturbing, like walking into a room already filled with grief. I would feel anxious, sad, and deeply uncomfortable for no clear reason. I couldn't stay in that room for long, a few minutes at most. My chest would tighten, my skin would prickle, and I would feel this overwhelming need to leave. Eventually, I stopped going in there entirely, unless I absolutely had to. I didn't tell the others at first because I didn't want to sound dramatic or suggestible. My own room used to be the old living room of the apartment. It was the largest room, with tall windows and high ceilings that reminded you just how old the building really was. During the day, it felt fine. At night, it felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I slept there anyway, because it was my room, and I didn't want to give in to unease I couldn't explain. One morning, I woke up to a sound that instantly filled me with terror. It was a growling sound. Not a soft noise, not a creak or a hum. It sounded like a large animal, like a big cat or a snarling dog, low and aggressive, right there in the room with me. I opened my eyes, heart racing, and tried to move. I couldn't. My body was pinned down against the bed as if something heavy was pressing me into the mattress. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't even turn my head properly. The growling continued, close enough that it felt like it was coming from just inches away. But there was nothing there. No shape, no shadow, nothing I could see. Just that sound and the overwhelming sensation of being trapped. I was absolutely terrified, not just scared, but panicked in a way that makes your thoughts fragment. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to force myself to move, to fight whatever was holding me down, but my body refused to respond. Eventually, the growling stopped. The pressure lifted. I could move again. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The room looked completely normal. Morning light was coming through the windows. Nothing was out of place. I told myself it must have been sleep paralysis. That explanation made sense. It was the only thing that made sense. I clung to it because the alternative was too uncomfortable to consider. I didn't tell my roommates about it right away. Around that time, one of the girls I lived with had a cat. It was young, only about a year old. Healthy, playful, full of energy. There had been no signs of illness. One evening, we were all just hanging out in the apartment, talking casually, doing our own things. Then we heard the cat. It was making a horrible sound. A sound I had never heard an animal make before. It wasn't a meow or a cry. It was a desperate, gasping noise like it couldn't breathe. But we ran to find it and found the cat lying on the bathroom floor. Its tongue was hanging out. Its eyes were wide. It was gasping for air, making those awful sounds, its body barely moving. We didn't know what to do. We panicked. We tried to comfort it, tried to help, but there was nothing we could do. It happened so fast. Within 10 minutes, the cat was dead. No warning, no explanation. We were all shaken. The apartment felt unbearably quiet afterward. The energy in the place felt heavier than ever, like something had settled into the space. Even though I didn't believe in anything paranormal, I couldn't shake the feeling that this place was not right. After that, I couldn't ignore my unease anymore. The cold room still felt wrong. My bedroom still felt oppressive at night. I slept poorly, waking often, to listening to the sounds of the building, always on edge. The memory of the growling, the feeling of being pinned down, and the sudden death of the cat stayed with me. I moved out shortly after. I didn't make a big announcement about why. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The relief I felt when I left was immediate. The constant tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to fade. Even now, I struggle to explain what happened in that apartment. I'm still a skeptic. I still don't believe in ghosts. I don't claim that the apartment was haunted or cursed or anything like that. But I also can't deny how deeply unnerving that place was. How it affected me. How it made me feel things I had never felt before and haven't felt since. Some places just feel wrong. And sometimes, even if you don't believe in anything supernatural, you have to trust that feeling. Because that apartment in Oslo was not normal, and whatever was wrong with it, I'm grateful I didn't stay long enough to find out more. I want to tell this the way it lives in my memory, not as something dramatic or exaggerated, but as it actually felt from the inside. I am not proud of parts of it. I am not trying to shock anyone. I am just explaining something that happened to me and stayed with me, even when I tried to move on. At the time, I was in my early 20s. I had just come out of the army. I was physically strong, confident in my body, used to discipline and control. I was living with my girlfriend, working a normal job and trying to adjust to civilian life. I wasn't reckless, I wasn't naive, I wasn't looking for trouble. That night started like many others. After work, I went out with coworkers. Nothing wild, no club hopping, no binge drinking. Just a bar we'd been to before, a place that felt safe and familiar. I remember ordering 2 beers. On that part is clear. I remember holding the glass, the taste, the conversations. Everything felt normal. Then there's a hole. Not a blur. Not drunken confusion. A complete absence, like someone cut the film and skipped ahead. The next thing I remember is waking up. Not slowly, not groggily in a normal way. It felt like being pulled up from underwater too fast. My head was heavy. My body didn't respond properly. I couldn't move the way I wanted to. My muscles felt disconnected from my brain. And then I became aware of what was happening to me. A man was on top of me, forcing himself into my mouth, trying to make me react, trying to make my body respond while I was still barely conscious. The shock of it hit me all at once. Confusion, fear, rage, disbelief. I remember gagging, pushing him away, forcing myself upright. And the first words out of my mouth were pure instinct. "What the fuck are you doing?" He didn't panic. He didn't stop in shame or fear. He smiled. And he said calmly, confidently, like this was already agreed upon, "You wanted this." That sentence still echoes in my head sometimes. Something snapped in me. I don't remember making a decision. I don't remember weighing consequences. My body took over. I curled up from where I was lying and threw the hardest uppercut I have ever thrown in my life. I had trained for years. I knew how to hit. I knew how to put weight behind a punch. I hit him once. He went down. He didn't get back up. I don't remember feeling scared after that. I remember feeling furious, a kind of anger I had never experienced before. Not loud rage, but cold, focused fury. Like every protective instinct I had ever developed turned inward and outward at the same time. I got up and started looking for my clothes. That part makes me angry even now. My clothes were scattered across the apartment, not neatly placed, thrown around. Shoes in one place, wallet in another, cards separated. Like someone had gone through my things deliberately. Like control didn't end with what he tried to do to my body, but extended to my belongings, my identity, my sense of order. That violation made the anger spike again. I remember thinking about hitting him again, about making sure he felt something close to what I was feeling. But he was still unconscious. And somewhere, buried under the rage, there was enough clarity to know that staying longer would only make things worse. Then I heard the noise. Banging, yelling, screaming. A deep, frantic sound of someone trying to break through the front door. I didn't care at first. That's the strange part. The noise registered, but it didn't matter. It could have been the police. It could have been the building collapsing. I didn't feel fear anymore, just momentum. I finished getting dressed. I gathered everything I could find. I opened the door. On the other side was a much smaller man, screaming, hysterical. He was maybe 5'3". He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He jumped at me, hitting me, shouting that I had fucked his boyfriend and locked the door. In that moment, everything went black. I don't mean figuratively. I mean I lost time again. The next clear memory I have is being in a taxi. I don't remember leaving the apartment. I don't remember the street. I don't remember how I got into the cab or what I said to the driver. I just remember sitting there, staring at nothing, shaking, feeling like my body was finally catching up to what had happened. I went home to my girlfriend. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to put words to it. I just cried. Quietly. For a long time. The kind of crying where your chest hurts and you don't make noise because you don't even have the energy for that. In the days that followed, I checked the news obsessively. I needed to know if someone had died. I needed to know if I had crossed a line without realizing it. I needed to know what kind of future I was walking into. No deaths were reported. Nothing showed up. That didn't bring relief the way I expected. What stayed with me wasn't fear of consequences. It was the realization of how quickly control can be taken from you. How easily someone can decide your body is no longer yours. How helpless strength is when your consciousness is removed. I had always thought of myself as someone who could protect himself. Someone who wouldn't be a victim. Someone who wouldn't freeze or be overpowered. That belief shattered. It took a long time to rebuild any sense of safety. Even longer to talk about it without feeling shame, confusion, or anger rising back up. People don't talk enough about male victims, about how disorienting it is when your identity, your strength, your training, your assumptions all fail at once, about how rage and trauma can coexist, about how survival doesn't always look clean or heroic. I didn't report it. I don't know if that was the right choice. At the time, I just wanted distance, silence, normalcy. I wanted the world to stop moving for a moment so I could catch my breath. Even now, years later, parts of that night surface unexpectedly. Not as clear images, but as sensations. A sudden tension, a spike of anger, a moment of dissociation. What hurts the most isn't just what was done to me. It's the sentence. You wanted this. Because no one ever does. And sometimes surviving means carrying something that never fully makes sense, even when you did everything you could to fight back. I'm still here. But that night is too. I'm going to tell this as clearly and calmly as I can, because what makes it unsettling isn't shock value or exaggeration. It's how ordinary it all begins, and how close it came to ending very differently. This story didn't happen to me directly. It happened to a woman who was a friend of a friend. Someone close enough that the details didn't feel like a rumor, but distant enough that I only learned the full picture piece by piece over time. Even so, it stuck with me in a way most stories don't. It's the kind of thing that quietly rearranges how you see the world. It started in a completely normal way. She was out at a bar one evening. Nothing unusual, no wild partying, just drinks, conversation, the kind of casual social night that people have all the time. She met a man there. He seemed friendly, normal, not pushy, not strange. They talked, had a few drinks, and eventually he invited her back to his place for one more. She agreed. That decision, so small and common, is the point where everything could have ended. At his place, they talked more. She had a drink. At some point after that, she began to feel wrong. Not tipsy, not drunk in the usual sense. Sick, dizzy, disoriented. Her body didn't feel like it was responding properly anymore. Something felt off in a way she couldn't quite describe, but instinctively recognized as danger. She excused herself and went to the bathroom. That choice saved her life. The moment she closed the bathroom door, the situation became clear enough for her to act. She realized she was losing control fast. Her thoughts were slipping. Her coordination was going. Whatever had been put in her drink was working quickly. She pulled out her phone and dialed the emergency number. In her country, it's 112, equivalent to 911. She gave the address. She tried to explain, but she didn't get far. Her words started slurring. Her vision narrowed. Before she could finish the call, she passed out on the bathroom floor. The call didn't disconnect cleanly. The dispatcher could hear something was wrong. A sudden collapse. Silence. No response. Enough to trigger an emergency response. Police were dispatched immediately. I believe the fire department was sent as well. because they anticipated a medical emergency and possible forced entry. When they arrived, they knocked. No answer. They didn't wait. They broke the door down. What they found inside changed how they handled everything that followed. They found her unconscious in the bathroom, and they found the rest of the apartment. Every surface was covered in plastic, not casually, not partially, completely. Walls, floors, furniture, plastic sheeting taped and arranged deliberately, like preparation rather than protection. In the middle of the living room was a table. It wasn't a dining table. It had straps, restraints, designed to hold someone down. Around it were knives, tools, items that clearly weren't decorative and clearly weren't for anything benign. Instruments meant to cause pain, to control, to prolong suffering. This wasn't spontaneous violence. This was planned. The officers made a decision in seconds. They put a bag over her head. They carried her out of the apartment as quickly as possible. Not to restrain her, not to punish her, to protect her. She began to wake up while being carried outside, still disoriented, still drugged, with a bag over her head. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know why she couldn't see. She didn't know where she was. That moment haunted her later more than anything else. She survived. Physically. But survival doesn't mean the end of the story. In the weeks that followed, she struggled badly. Panic, nightmares, anxiety, a constant sense that something was unfinished, that there was something she wasn't being told. What disturbed her the most wasn't even the idea that she had been drugged. It was the bag. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would the police do that? What was inside that apartment that she wasn't allowed to see? Every time she asked, she was brushed off. Vague answers. Vague. For your safety. You don't need to know. It's better if you don't dwell on it. But her mind did dwell on it. The unknown became worse than any image she could imagine. Eventually, she began seeing a psychologist to deal with the trauma. And during those sessions, the psychologist recognized something important. Closure required truth. You can't heal from something if your brain is constantly filling in blanks with worst-case scenarios. The psychologist formally requested full disclosure from the police. Reluctantly, they agreed. And they told her everything. They described the plastic-covered apartment, the table, the restraints, the knives and devices, the clear evidence that this wasn't a sexual assault that got out of hand, but a carefully prepared environment for torture. They told her, plainly, or that the man's likely intention was not just to hurt her, but to kill her. Slowly. The bag wasn't to hide evidence. It was to protect her from seeing something that would have stayed with her forever. Learning this didn't bring relief. It brought a different kind of horror. Because now she knew exactly how close she had come to something irreversible. How thin the margin was between her life and an unthinkable end. A bathroom break, a phone call, a dispatcher paying attention, any one of those things failing, and she would not be here. What makes the story even harder to accept is what happened next. The man was arrested, but the charges were limited. He was convicted only of drugging her, not attempted murder, not kidnapping, not preparing a torture environment, not possession of weapons with intent, just the drugging. He served little to no meaningful time. And after that, he was free. She had to live in the same city as him. Imagine that. Knowing someone planned your torture and death, and then passing them in public spaces. Knowing they're out there, walking freely, with no visible mark of what they intended to do. That alone would break many people. What unsettles me personally is that this wasn't an isolated story. Not long after I heard this, I heard a strikingly similar account from a neighboring country, only about 4 hours away. Same pattern, bar, invitation, drugging, bathroom, emergency call, discovery of a prepared environment. Too similar to ignore. I've often wondered if these cases were connected, if it was the same individual or a network, or a method shared among people who believe they'll never be caught if they hide behind technicalities in the law. I don't know the answer. What I do know is this. The world is full of moments that seem harmless until they aren't. Full of people who blend in perfectly until the door closes behind you. This story isn't meant to scare people away from living. It's not meant to say never trust anyone, never go out, never say yes. It's meant to highlight how razor-thin safety can be sometimes, and how much survival can depend on instinct, timing, and the quiet competence of strangers who take a phone call seriously. She lived. But part of her will always be in that bathroom, dialing a number, hoping someone would listen before everything went dark. And the fact that someone like that man could walk free afterward is the part that truly stays with me. Not because of fear, but because of how broken that feels. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.